Welcome everyone to the Solarpunk Poetry Workshop. My name is JD Harlock. I'm the poetry editor at Solarpunk Magazine. I've had my poetry published in Strange Horizons, Mythila Review, Starline, and The Future Fire. Thank you all for joining me today. We're going to start now. If anyone joins, I'll admit them. Like the point of this workshop is to guide people on how to write solarpunk poetry in hopes of submitting their solarpunk poetry to Solarpunk Magazine. Now, what I try to do is create a soft introduction to solarpunk. This is general enough that anyone can use it and map it out to their own political leanings within solarpunk. Since people in solarpunk are all over the map politically, you have anarchists, you have Marxists, you have communists. This is the most general version of solarpunk and how you can use it in solarpunk poetry so that it can be accessible to everyone. I'm going to start out by defining solarpunk poetry, then showing you defining solarpunk, then showing you how solarpunk poetry is different from solarpunk fiction. I'm going to then show you an example of solarpunk poetry that was published in Solarpunk Magazine, and then we're going to brainstorm a bit for 5 minutes, and the rest of the session is going to be you trying to write up your own solarpunk poems, or at least writing the beginnings of them. All right, let's begin. So what is solarpunk? Solarpunk is a genre and movement that envisions a world that is one, free and egalitarian, focused on craftsmanship, community, and technology, and third, powered by renewable energy. These three elements make up solarpunk. Now you can have different variations on these themes or different elements that you can add in, like DIY, do-it-yourself ethos and stuff like that. But at its core, this is what solarpunk is, in my opinion, at least. So what is solarpunk trying to do? We're trying to, as solarpunks, we're trying to imagine a better future while going against the systems that exist now that are preventing that future from happening. That are preventing the future that are preventing the future from happening. That future from happening. Sorry, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, so. Oh, okay. So, how long have you been able? Sorry, Bree, to interrupt this, but how long have you been able to hear me? I've been talking for like a good 2-3 minutes. Okay. All right, I'll continue. All right, okay. So what is Solarpunk trying to do? We're trying to imagine a brighter future while subverting the systems that prevent that brighter future from happening. In a way, Solarpunk is a rejection of the mainstream sci-fi and fantasy's vision of the future. When we think of the future now, ever since Blade Runner came out, we basically imagine a cyberpunk future. It might not know it's cyberpunk. Like a lot of the writers or filmmakers who imagine a dystopian future, they're actually imagining cyberpunk, but they don't know it. They just think they're imagining the de facto future that's in store for all of us, but they're specifically imagining cyberpunk. It's always something punkish, where everything's online, there are hackers everywhere, crime is everywhere, skyscrapers as tall as the sky, and neon signs everywhere. But that's cyberpunk, and what we're trying to do is reject that nihilism that's in the vision of the future of mainstream sci-fi and fantasy. Also, solarpunk acts as a solution to the problems we're facing today, not just by offering practical solutions like this is how we fix this region's problem or this is how we fix this country's problems in terms of climate change and that kind of stuff, but we're helping people visualize what the solarpunk future is. Because again, when people visualize the future, they just see cyberpunk or they see some dystopian stand-in that's similar to cyberpunk. What we want to do is give them the ability to visualize something outside of, cyberpunks and dystopias. So now we're gonna delve into the origins of solarpunk. So solarpunk was coined back in 2014 by blogger Olivia Lewis on Tumblr. And her post went viral, and she defined the aesthetics of the genre as solarpunk, a plausible near future sci fi genre, which I like to imagine is based on updated Art Nouveau, Victorian, and Edwardian aesthetics. Now, since then, since 2014, solarpunk has intersected with a lot of regional genres like Afrofuturism or Amazofuturism, which have expanded and evolved the aesthetic of the genre with a focus on uh, indigenous, ethnic, and regional visualizations. It's not just here, the definition that Olivia Lewis gave is very Eurocentric, very Western centric. But once the global South got involved in making solar punk, the way we visualize it expanded. So another really important influence on the genre's visualization is Hayao Miyazaki. He doesn't get enough credit, but usually you'll hear him mentioned when people talk about what solarpunk looks like. And almost everything he's done has somehow influenced solarpunk, not just in terms of visuals, but in terms of storytelling. Because he really is a pioneer of slice of life filmmaking and storytelling with stuff like Kiki's Delivery Service or My Neighbor Totoro. And solarpunk stories tend to tackle these slice of life stories more often than the action packed stories that you see in some of his other movies, like Howl's Moving Castle. Now, when we talk about aesthetics, the movies that mainly influence the solarpunk genre are Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, especially in terms of tech and fashion, Castle in the Sky, specifically the design of Laputa, which is the titular castle in the sky, and Howl's Moving Castle in terms of the designs of the city, because it does draw on um, Edwardian architecture and uh, the other influences that the blogger mentioned in the previous post. So when we talk about visual motifs and colors in solarpunk, usually there's a focus on natural colors. Now you don't need to have green, yellow, everything be green, yellow, and blue, but those are the most natural colors. And you can add brown there if you'd like. And usually when you see solarpunk art or any visual representation of solarpunk, it's going to be drenched in these colors. Now you have other visual motifs, some obvious, some not. Like renewable energy tech is something you're going to see in solarpunk quite often, whether it's solar panels, wind turbines, tidal fences, or barrages. Indigenous clothing. This is especially common in uh, stories from the global south or visual representations of a solarpunk in the global south, where basically people abandon the westernized clothing they got accustomed to and return to older forms of fashion. There's also a harmony between nature and everyday life. You'll see little touches in solarpunk representations where nature and everyday life have intersected in a way. Usually, like when we go out into the world, nature and everyday life is at constant odds. We have to tear down trees to make way for roads. But when you see solarpunk, usually they've come up with creative solutions to accommodate nature within a cityscape setting or within a town setting. This one's important. Low-key futuristic settings. There isn't Solarpunk is technically hard SF in the fact that it basically tries to use real science in its depiction of solarpunk futures, but that science isn't front and center. It's not the focus of everything. You mainly see it in the background, like with wind turbines or little touches when it comes to the technology, especially the renewable tech, which isn't front and center. It's in the background with the nature. Sometimes you don't even see it, and it ties into the harmony between nature and everyday life. There's also, when it comes to the global south, repurposed infrastructure. So this is a practical and an interesting world building um, touch, where you want to try and show the history of the world before the solarpunk utopia came about. You don't want to just create a solarpunk utopia that seems removed from our history. So you add repurposed infrastructure to kind of as kind of set dressing to make it clear that there was a life before the solarpunk utopia, and people had to adapt and adjust to get to the point where they've established the solarpunk utopia, and they did that by using the tools they had at hand. And finally, green architecture, and this speaks for itself. So what are solarpunk's themes and narratives? Solarpunk settings are, usually what when you think of solarpunk, you think nature, gardens and forests, community centers, maker spaces, repair cafes, sustainable cities, villages and towns with green architecture, and spiritual and cultural locations. Now, when it comes to the kind of narratives Solarpunk tackles, you have the standard slice of life setting, slice of life stories that mostly draw on the Japanese variety of slice of life, not the originator of the genre, which are the French. And that's mostly because of Hayao Miyazaki. You have a lot of stories like My Neighbor Totoro or Kiki's Delivery Service influencing the writers who write Solarpunk. There's also stories focused on communal problem solving, where basically a community gets together to solve a common problem in a solarpunk utopia or in a setting that's approaching a solarpunk utopia, an uptopia, if you will. There's also a customization stories where people have to learn to come to terms with a solarpunk society. And more often than not, that means coming to terms with the end of capitalism and the way our lives are organized in a capitalist structure. And the final one is people working towards a solarpunk utopia, or usually in a solarpunk utopia, or in a future that's a lot brighter than the present we're living now. And these now you can always find different types of narratives in solarpunk other than the ones listed here, but these are the general ones I would say that the genre tends to tackle. Now, recurring themes, I'm not going to list all of them, but these are organized based on topics. But in general, there's a focus on harmony between science and nature, where anything that is shown to, where any science that we know can benefit nature or that can be integrated into nature will usually be used somehow in the story or setting to further Solarpunk's point, because cyberpunk is about how technology will destroy us. Solarpunk is about how we can save ourselves with technology if we use it properly. Now, what separates solarpunk poetry from fiction? Now, because poetry has constraints, usually there isn't a big word count. I would say, in my opinion, solarpunk poetry doesn't need to have solarpunk narratives, but it does need to have solarpunk motifs, settings, or narratives. It needs to tackle the themes of solarpunk with speculative fiction elements. It's not enough that you tackle the themes of solarpunk in a present or older setting. You need to have speculative fiction elements where people are either imagining a brighter future, subverting the systems that keep it from happening, or doing both at the same time. Now, this one is a sticking point with people. What is punk exactly? A lot of people conjure up certain images when they hear the term punk because they're not really familiar with the punk movement, which came from punk music. Usually, when people think of punk, they think of the punk that they see in movies, especially 80s movies, where it's someone with like a weird haircut, piercings, spikes on their clothes, something out of Mad Max. But the punk movement actually has like a well-defined ethos, and this ethos doesn't need to be hard-edged or cynical. It doesn't like when we think of punk, we think of like these hard-edged cynical stories where people are like cursing and being violent and rowdy and snubbing their nose at people. But you can subvert the systems in your life without having to be hard-edged or cynical or being rude or mean. So the subculture of punk is characterized by anti-establishment views, a promotion of individual freedom, do-it-yourself ethics, nonconformity, anti-authoritarianism, anti-corporatism, anti-consumerism, direct action, and the final one, which is not selling out, which I think does fit into solarpunk stories, since greenwashing is a big issue today, and a lot of solarpunk stories tackle the fight against greenwashing. So selling out in terms of greenwashing is a big part of the stories. Now, this one is a personal touch I've added, but it's about experimentation. Building a solarpunk utopia will need us to experiment with new forms of society, politics, economics, and social relationships. So, in this sense, solarpunk poetry does encourage experimentation in form and in content. Since we still haven't defined the tropes of the genre properly yet, it's only been 8 years since the genre was coined. there's a lot of room for experimenting and pushing the genre forward and seeing where we can take these themes and ideas and concepts. And I'd urge people not to think inside the box inside the box when they're writing solar punk poetry. There's a lot more to it than just having a nice Arcadian setting with wind turbines in the back and living your life the way farmers used to back in the day. Now I'm going to give you guys an example of solar punk poetry. This one is Noble by Mariska Peluchette. We published it in the first issue of Solarpunk Magazine. I'm going to play a recording of it as read by the former co-editor, Darusha.
Noble by Mariska Peluchette. Denali hurls wild grass. She wraps strands around her wrists up to her elbows and walks from the edge of sunrise to the rim of sunset, dragging the day and the plains behind her. Fairhair breaks roads, his antlers crack, pavement into pebbles disrupts, gravel and rolls it into earth. He walks over lands that used to be called streets, ensuring the people have gone. Basil paints with vines. His scurrying dislodges paper scraps like dying leaves as he climbs each crumbling building and paints a landscape of the past, the future. His murals color high-rises into hills. Jamila spreads seeds like radiation. Millions of bombs dropped over roofs. Roads, memories. She beats her wings and flaps, a perfect breeze spun from her effort to repopulate Noble. Santi carries the forest into the city. His fur is dusted with pollen, his nose driving sprouts through the cracks. He follows the paths, drawn by all the noble inhabitants, all the children of disaster. Chi guards the boundary. Their roots hold the line, their branches pull poison from the clouds. They grow to cover the skeletons that fumble and fall with the ages. They know that Noble is the frontier, the first forest to grow from a city.
So hello everyone. This is the first time you see me, but so what I love about this poem specifically is the fact that it has a punk element to it, a strong punk element where you see these youth subverting the system they live in, which is basically uh, which is basically the cityscape, this nightmarish cityscape, and they're actively trying to destroy it using their, let's say, paranormal powers, and they're building the solar punk utopia through it. But there's no cynicism or hard-edged rowdiness or like coarseness to the way their punkish sentiments are portrayed. They're just actively trying to build a better future through it. Now, we're gonna brainstorm some ideas for solar punk poetry. Anyone who wants to speak can let me know, and I'll unmute you, and you can start brainstorming. Let me know in the chat if you'd like to be unmuted. Yes. So what I meant was, I'd like you to brainstorm concepts for a solar punk poem. Like what idea would you build the solar punk poem around? Like this, like the poem I just showed you has a very specific concept to it, which is a bunch of mutated youth trying to rebuild a forest from a city, and the whole poem is basically a description of how they do that and the sentiment behind it. And I'd like you guys to brainstorm ideas for solar punk poems. Like maybe someone is like one of the ones I wrote that got published recently is basically about a watcher who has a troubled dark past and is one of the people who built the solar punk utopia they're in, and they're watching as the wind turbine moves slowly and reminiscing about their past and they uh, how they were able how they've justified the things they've done to create the solar punk utopia. You can brainstorm and by talking on the call. I'll unmute you if you'd like. Just let me know in the chat if you'd like to be unmuted and we can discuss it.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Bree. Yeah, and I had this idea. I like to write about clones a lot. I like that science fiction element of just this idea of cloning yeet or body parts or some such interesting convoluted experiment that is then replicated in that universe. And I kind of had this idea of like um, in a poem, what if there were this universe to be explored where uh, people were cloned at birth and kind of had these clones like um, hidden away in like this like, yeah, I don't know, some kind of lab or something, and then if they were maimed or something or needed a transplant, they could access these like clones of themselves. And then for the poem though, I was thinking like, what if the narrator had confronted like their clone, like if it like woke up. I'm just like rambling at this point. But I don't know, I just kind of like this idea of confronting the self in another form. I think there is this video game called Soma that was released somewhat recently where the player had to do this kind of confrontation of the self and past versions of the self. So yeah, I'm like interested in exploring that in like a solar punk futuristic high tech environment.
Can
So
I?
what I would
Oh,
sorry, you can go.
is that okay? Sorry. Hi, I'm Simone. Hiya. Yeah, I was just going to respond to what Brianna was just talking about cloning body parts and things. I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. I wrote a poem a little while ago about how we look like nature ourselves, like the palms of our hand look like leaves and the veins look like the rivers and various other things. So I was wondering, that just made me think about if we were to be cloned, would we be cloned exactly as ourselves, or would we actually, instead of being just cloned, would we be made up of different parts of the earth kind of thing, rather than just a replica of ourselves? I don't know if that makes sense at all. I like having tendrils for your hair, like vines and things, so you're kind of part plant, part person. Yeah, that's all.
I think that's interesting. And the way, if I was going to give advice, I would say that think of how someone would react to a clone of themselves while thinking of the solar punk ethos. So usually in clone stories, we tend to react negatively when we meet a clone of ourselves. But if we're trying to subvert that, I would say maybe there's an initial conflict when they meet the clone, but they can embrace the clone in a way, they can open up themselves and their community to the clone. Cloning doesn't have to be portrayed as a negative thing. It's just, scientific progress for us. And there are ways where we can integrate cloning into our societies and into our lives personally, and our clones into our lives in a way that isn't cynical or hard-edged or depressing or riddled with like angst. You can think of a way where someone embraces the clone, tries to integrate the clone into their life or their community. And if you focus the poem on that aspect, I think you can make a really nice Solarpunk poem out of it.
Can I throw in an idea in the ring?
Of course.
Hi everyone, I'm Anna. I'm obsessed with time, and I wonder if the concept of time in a Solarpunk world might be a lot different than like our kind of like high productivity environment today, where you're trying to squeeze as much productivity from every second as you can, but the perception of time would probably change when we don't live in that kind of ethos isn't quite the right word, is it? The kind of environment where
Mindset,
maybe things are, I won't say maybe things are slower. I'm sorry.
I was trying to say mindset, if we don't live in that kind of mindset.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, it's a bit like actually late for me, so my brain isn't working quite so well. Yeah, mindset. Thank you so much.
So there's this great video Wisecrack did on how our perception of time evolved throughout the ages. Time is fixed, but the way we view time and the way we measure our time and what's worth spending time on, what isn't, has evolved and changed, and it'll no doubt change if we ever achieve a Solarpunk utopia. Now, we now measure time in terms of capitalist achievement. So I got this amount of stuff done today. I made this much money. It's kind of intertwined with hustle culture, where you constantly have to hustle, constantly have to work to get yourself out of the capitalist hellhole at the bottom and reach the top. So I think since Solarpunk really is about the end of capitalism and what our lives would be like, there will be a fundamental shift in the way we perceive time. In my opinion, life would slow down and people would have to reorient their focus from their careers and working to produce or working to make money and kind of pursuing their own activities at their own leisure. And there won't be this competitiveness with other people where like he achieved more than me in this set amount of time, or he did better than me 5 years after graduating. And it would be really interesting to explore really when time doesn't mean anything anymore. It doesn't matter if you got this degree at 21 or if you graduated high school at 18, or there's nothing waiting for you at the end of it. All your needs are taken care of, and you don't really have to struggle to survive anymore. You can just live your life the way you want to and do whatever you want to do when you want to do it. So does anyone else have any idea to brainstorm? Or any comments on what Anna and Bree had to say? If you haven't already, you can start working on the Solarpunk poem you want to work on. And if you'd like to read what you have at the end, let me know. At least 10 minutes before the session is meant to end. In the chat, I've linked to 3 videos about how we measure time in the modern day, especially in the workforce, and how hustle culture ties into our perception of time, and how the modern workforce is riddled with, the academic term is bullshit according to the guy who coined it, but like how the modern workforce is riddled with inefficiency, and how people spend most of their time in the office trying to look busy as opposed to actually working because of the 40-hour work week, and how it forces people to stay in an office all day when they don't even have work to do. And I think these videos would really help a lot if you're trying to see the philosophical underpinnings, trying to explore the philosophical underpinnings of time in the modern capitalist world, and how life would be very different in a solarpunk utopia when these constraints aren't on us anymore. I'll also link to the book Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber. He basically, it's the basis for one of the videos, and he tries to explain how the modern workforce is riddled with quote unquote bullshit jobs, and how it wastes our time and isn't productive. And even though capitalism promises us efficiency, it's actually extremely inefficient to have an economy like this. And he offers solutions as to what we can do with our time if we're not chained to our work.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, yeah, disclaimer. It's been a while since I was in a poetry workshop. I didn't focus at all on meter, but I thought it would be fun to have a little bit of rhyming. So this is what I got so far in that 10 minutes. White-eyed, your sight rolls to the front of your face, and I, upset, question my whole life lived at its quick pace. You have lived slow, sleeping in your science box, in your lab, and now you show me myself, the keys in your locks. My own eyes stare back at me. My ears hear my voice. It is you who sees and you who makes the noise. They say you are myself, but a version asleep, and for my future health you lie in wait of scalpels creep. But we pulled off the lid and tore away the cords, and you took to fear with the first dress of yours.
Would anyone else like to share?
Oh, I can unmute myself. I haven't really written anything, but I just wanted to say that I was just thinking about bands of people, like of all age groups, going all around, just living outside in nature, and all traipsing around the countryside together, picking up things and creating things, kind of very nomadic. I'm just thinking along very nomadic lines of people walking around and settling down wherever they are, but kind of creating little homes or finding things to recycle and rejuvenate. And yeah, I'm kind of going along those lines. That's all I wanted to say, because I've got a bit of brain fry.
That's
all
a
about,
lovely concept for a poem, by the way. Just from your description, I loved it, and I think it would make a great poem.
Great, thank you. I just thought about, it's all about I think it came up in one of the other sessions where they were saying about everyone keeps thinking that we're going to be going backwards, but we don't have to go backwards. We can keep going forwards. We don't have to always do the old ways, because they're not always the best ways. So it's that kind of,
it's a really nice variation on walking the earth or nomadic stories, where you have people walk the earth, but usually it's because of tragedy, either personal tragedy or because the earth has been decimated. And I think it's an interesting way to flip the trope on its head and explore a new angle to these stories that we've heard too many times. I mean, I think they started with westerns, if not before, like something like Shane, I'm thinking. And I'd love to see this written, and hopefully one day submit it to Solarpunk Magazine.
Yes, I will have a go. I like the idea of, groups of people, instead of coming across each other in the countryside and they're all like defensive and aggro, they just kind of are like, hey, What are you up to? Oh, we're doing this. You know, this kind of coming across people. Like, you know, when you get out for a friendly dog walk, everyone's nice to each other. There's none of this kind of, yeah, that kind of thing. Something nice. I'm glad you liked.
I have excuse me, I have a question about Brianna's. I think it was Brianna who read.
Yes.
Brianna, what was your last sentence? Were you ending with fear?
Yeah, well, I intended to get into what JD was talking about with this sort of like the narrator and the clone are looking at each other, and there's this sort of like very solarpunky acceptance happening. But yeah, as it stood right now, the last like stanza was supposed to be like the narrator and whatever group of people they were with took off the like the lid that was encasing the clone, and the clone woke up and reacted with fear and was given a dress to wear.
Huh. I liked it until we got there.
Yeah,
I
I
feel
think
like
that would not be a great place to end it.
I feel like it wandered back into dystopia.
yeah,
Right.
I know what you mean. Like I think maybe either change the line and you took the fear with the first dress of yours, or to expand it beyond and took the fear with the first dress of yours. Like keep going to show like
Mhm.
the clone, you know, realizing that they're not in this horrible situation and
Yeah.
they're now in a solarpunk utopia, and you know they get to live their lives instead of being organ crops.
Yeah. That's really great, JD. Thank you.
So I wrote one, but
If you can paste it into the chat so that we can read while you say it out loud.
paste. Oh, I'm sorry. I just wrote it on the nice notebook y'all sent me for
No worries,
signing
no
up.
worries. Yeah, no worries.
And it's, I mean, you know, first drafts and unfinished as well as Brianna's. So I wrote the title Repurposed. There was a life before, built on competition, selling out, conspiracies. We built a new one underneath it, chipped caves and rotted foundations, scrabbled in debris, while they gazed out at stars and planets, gazed with eyes of conquest, blind to vision, deaf to our despair. We built a new life in their shadow. We built it strong and intertwined. We built it out of nothing much, things they discarded when corporations became people, my friend. We countered lies with soft resistance, gave before them, closed behind. We joined hands, we raised fiddles, we danced circles, we raised crops. They flew away, we stayed.
It is lovely. I really liked it, and I like the concept. You touched on this in the poem, but where like they built a life out of the repurposed infrastructure of the old world that was left
Yeah.
behind by these corporations that left. I love that angle to it. It really it's so solar punk, and you wouldn't find this in any type of other genre.
Well, I'm not as much a writer as I am a artist, and I often do upcycled art. So that's why my poem went that way.
You're a very good writer, from what you've shown me, though.
And it sure was helpful, everything you told us at the beginning in the sort of PowerPoint presentation that really explained it, because I always feel more lunar than solar, and I find this movement really interesting, to kind of hitch onto it as more of maybe thinking more of myself as maybe being lunar punk.
I were to add slides to it to cater to
Oh, I
lunar
can't hear
punk.
you.
Sorry,
What?
can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Can you, yeah. So if I were
Yes.
to add slides to it to cater to people interested in writing lunar punk, the main two things I would add are a focus on spirituality. It's not necessary, but there tends to be a more spiritual aspect to it. And I don't mean in terms of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, that kind of stuff. It can be any sort of spirituality that either made up or real world. And there's more of a focus on individualism on top of the aesthetic, which is, night instead of sun, moon instead of sun, night instead of day. There would be more of an individualistic aspect to lunar punk as opposed to solar punk, which is communal. There's more of an emphasis on the individual and what the individual wants, and there's a darker edge to lunar punk stories. So it would make a whole other. It would need a whole other workshop to get into lunar punk and show examples of it. But if you're curious, and this is the most abbreviated version I can give you of what separates lunar punk from solar punk.
That's odd to me that it's, well, maybe it's more individualism because it's more inward gazing, but that seems like it would bring you eventually to the collective and back to communalism. But maybe the two are so, maybe solar and lunar punk are so intertwined that that's why that happens.
When I mean more individualistic, I don't mean just like purely individualistic, but there is more of a focus on the individual and how the individual interacts with the society, especially in a spiritual sense or a communal sense. But it doesn't promote individualism. It just has more of that. Yeah, it's more individualistic and a bit darker. By darker, I don't mean like dark and edgy, but just darker than solar punk stories tend to be. And they don't need to be, by the way. Lunar punk stories don't need to be individualistic or darker, but that's what they tend to be from, because we recently did the lunar punk issue for Solarpunk Magazine. And in general, when the genre was defined, in contrast to solar punk, that's what the people who defined it were aiming for, not just in terms of aesthetics, but in terms of storytelling and themes.
Right, and maybe darker in terms of more shadow.
Sure, yeah.
Than light, right.
Yeah. And it can have like a bit more of an edge to it, but it doesn't need to at the end of the day. It can be anything. It can be anything as long as it fits the themes of, solar punk, lunar punk. Well, we're at 10:45, so the workshop is officially over. If there's anything anyone wants to say, this is your last chance. And if not, then we'll be signing off in a minute.
I have a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Yes. Sure.
Firstly, just on that lunar punk thread, I've seen some of the conversation around sort of another sort of subgenre. I want to say it's like in some of your poetry has been alluded to that, so like the darker side of solar punk. In my head, it's like something like Sunshine Dark, but it's not quite.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
In some of your poetry has been attributed to sort of a newer subgenre where we sort of like more the darker side of the Utopia. And I'm wondering if that is something that is more desirable to be explored also in poetry, like the emotional side of the pain of transition.
When it comes to Solarpunk Magazine, or when it comes to the genre in general?
I think the genre in general.
So yeah, like I think at this point the genre has explored the basic stories that can tell with solarpunk, where it's just people in a solarpunk setting trying to what life would be like in these settings. Basically, that's a lot of the early stories, just trying to imagine what life would be like. And we've gotten a clearer understanding of that. So now we're looking inward, what people in these settings feel, what people in these settings are dealing with, the kinds of problems they'll deal with. Because it is imagining what the end of capitalism is like. And to do that, we need to imagine both how much better off we'd be and what kind of new problems we would have in that scenario.
So is that what you mean when you mean when sort of like by sunshine noir? Is that the idea?
Oh, you're talking about my poem. I'm so sorry. You're talking about my poem specifically. Yeah. No, because I have an old laptop. Yeah, like I wanted to meld two genres. Sunshine noir is a genre that the most famous example of it would be Chinatown, which was written by Robert Towne and stars Jack Nicholson. It's basically sun-drenched noir, sun-drenched neo-noir. And because Solarpunk and Sunshine Noir share a similar aesthetic, and because I wanted to have a darker take on Solarpunk, I thought these genres just go together so well. And that was one of the main motivations for the poem. I just wanted to explore the darker undercurrents, because there is a faction in Solarpunk that thinks, and with peace and love we can achieve anything we want, and there is another faction that might not be violent or evil or malicious, but understands that there is a need for more in terms of action to achieve a Solarpunk utopia or to end climate change problems. There's this great video by Wisecrack where they explore new philosophers' ideas on how to fight climate change, and some philosophers suggest not harming other people, but kind of harming capitalist enterprises that are destroying the environment. So, like, imagine someone's building a pipeline. You can spend all the time you want protesting. It's unlikely that it will stop the pipeline, but if you destroy the pipeline and not harm anyone, of course, you wouldn't harm other people, but just destroy the pipeline, eventually it wouldn't be financially feasible for these corporations to build a pipeline. And I wanted to kind of explore what a person who is willing to do that kind of thing, the mentality behind them, the mental state they're in, and once that Solarpunk utopia is achieved, how do they feel about their actions? Like, this is, I mean, you're destroying private property by doing things like this. And I was curious what would go on inside the mind of a person who would commit to building a Solarpunk utopia through those means and not through the peace and love, that we generally associate with Solarpunk.
Thank you. It's interesting. So it's very much like the eco-terrorist route, if you want to use that term, which I'm not entirely sure I agree with, but yeah. Okay, that's very helpful.
Yeah. I kept it vague.
Sorry, you were going to say?
Sorry, I was just saying, I kept it vague what the Watcher's past is. I didn't want to put a label on it, or maybe he is that violent. Maybe he was an eco-terrorist. Maybe he was just one of those people who believed in you needed to like destroy private property. I kept it vague. I just wanted to see what someone who is in that position, once the Solarpunk utopia has been achieved, what they would think of their actions and whether they think they would be justified or not.
Thank you. Is there time for one last question, actually poetry related?
Sure, yes.
What's your view on traditional poetry forms and solarpunk? Since
Solarpunk draws on older forms of living culture, especially indigenous culture and indigenous lifestyles, I think there is a place for formal poetry and formal structures in Solarpunk poetry. It doesn't always have to be about experimentation and trying new things, because with Solarpunk we are trying and experimenting with new things, but we're also bringing back older lifestyles and ideas into the mix, like agrarian living or living in Arcadian environments. So I would say there is a place for formal style, and when it comes to Solarpunk Magazine, I'm always on the lookout for great poetry that rhymes or that is in a certain structure, like a sonnet or something like that. But it's rare that people even write it these days, because the market is kind of hostile to formal structures, so people don't tend to write it at all. But at Solarpunk Magazine, anyone's always welcome to send us rhyming poetry or stuff that's organized in like a sonnet or something similar. And I guess that's... is there any other questions? Thank you all too. All right, everyone, I'm gonna end the session now. See you. I hope we meet again.